Last time on Longbox Review. Okay. Shall we move on to our favorite?
Here we go.
The last, but certainly not least, Marilyn's Monsters.
I don't know if people can hear me rubbing my hands together in anticipation of this discussion.
And now the conclusion. Yes. So this was published in 2018. This is by Tommy Rodolphe. It was originally published in Europe in 2016 as Holy Wood, Holy space Wood, Holy Wood. And so that's actually a term and image that comes up frequently throughout this work. Okay, so this is what this book is about. This is Marilyn Monroe like you've never seen her before. Chasing fame and immortality, a downtrodden Norma Jean Baker runs away to the famously twisted Holy Wood, where dreams become reality. She gives in to the powers that be and allows herself to be reinvented into Marilyn, a real movie star. Though Marilyn dances in the limelight, it's not bright enough to purge the demons that crept through Norma's past and lurk in the shadows of her present. Written and illustrated by Tommy Rodolphe, Marilyn's Monsters immerses readers through its abstract and evocative art and cinematic storytelling in a beautifully dark world that obscures the line between dreams and nightmares. And this is exactly a great description of this book that describes how much I love it, why I love it, because it is, the art is abstract and evocative. It is cinematic in its storytelling. The dark world of Holy Wood and the bright lights of Hollywood contrast themselves in the form of Norma Jean / Marilyn, and tells a very intimate story of this person and the persona that she became. This is, George, this is one of those times, probably going to be one of those times where I love this book so much, I don't know that I could talk objectively about it, nor talk very, very well about it. That's not the right way to put it. I don't know that I could really speak eloquently about it because I'm so caught up in how much I love this book.
And here I am relying on you because, like you said, you went to college for literature.
Well, that was a lifetime ago.
But that's not what I went to college for. So I am, for as much as I love this book, I know that there are things about it that I love that there is no way I can put into words. And it's one of those things where you don't know why you like it so much. But like I had said earlier, upon second reading, Marilyn's Monsters moved its way up to my favorite out of the three. I didn't appreciate it as much the first time I read it. Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe even we have to, depending upon where our conversation goes, we may have to tell people you may know everything about Marilyn Monroe, but there may be spoiler alerts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It may happen. I'm not sure.
Because there are certainly details, and I don't. And this is reading this book now. I really actually want to read some biographical material that's less evocative as Marilyn's Monsters is, and more like the Rod Serling book, which is very much a chronological story of the person's life, right?
Oh yeah. Out of the Hedy Lamarr book, the Rod Serling book, and this book, this one is a totally different approach to telling you about to try to say it's a biography of Marilyn Monroe, which I don't know what your expectation was when you read this book, but I didn't expect it to be here. I'm missing the words now, but I didn't expect it to be grounded in reality. Let's put it that way. Even though there's a fantastical nature to it, I really didn't expect it to be a straight up biography. That is not what I was expecting at all. And I was only going by whatever the blurb was in previews. So I'm going to be very interested if it's in this month's previews. I want to read it again to want to try and tell myself, well, why did you think it was going to be a totally different type of story about Marilyn Monroe?
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was going to be straight up fiction.
That's interesting because I guess I did too, because when you see the cover, and let me pull this up here so I can reference it. So the cover of this is Marilyn, and she's mostly white, like she's bathed in spotlight. Even though it's just her, there's actually no spotlight here. But there's curtains around her. There's floodlights at the edge of the stage, lighting her up, and then behind her is this forest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very much like Hedy Lamarr. It's not realistic type comic book art, right? More
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely not the Rod Serling book.
Right.
There's
definitely a surrealism there, right there on the cover.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. And so I was expecting, I guess, the same thing because of this image. It's like, okay, this is, that coupled with the title itself, Marilyn's Monsters, I expected something a little bit more than just, this happened when she came to Hollywood as Norma Jean Baker, and this is how she transformed. We do get that, but it's so wrapped up and couched within that fantastical element that's part of this, integral to the story, that the biographical stuff almost is, well, in one way it's almost secondary, but in another, as we get to the end of the book, it becomes very important to the story itself. So
to put in the context for your listeners, I know the majority of your listeners, if not all of them, are comic book readers. So to kind of explain what I meant by what I was expecting out of this book, if anybody read the Rough Rider series from Aftershock Comics, where Adam Glass took Theodore Roosevelt, Harry Houdini, real people, but put them in a different context, but still had their personalities and their history behind them, but just put them in a different role. But they were it is the Theodore Roosevelt we know. It is the Harry Houdini we know. That's what I was expecting to get from this in some sort of way. Now, of course, not the same type of story. I expected to be spooky in some way, just because it was called Marilyn's Monsters and because of whatever the blurb was in previews, which was probably similar, probably just an abridged version of what you just read. But that's to try to give your listeners an idea of what I was expecting, and my expectations were totally turned upside down. Now I was totally off base, which I'm fine with. In fact, I'm happy that my expectations were totally wrong.
Well, here, let me. I kind of skipped over what we've been doing, or what I've been sharing, which is the critics' response or some sort of review, and this kind of ties into what you're talking about or trying to get at. So this is from David Cronenberg. Rodolphi's cartooning moves between aesthetics, from the nightmarish real world to the style of vintage cartoons, creating a hallucinatory effect that perfectly matches the dark underbelly of old Hollywood and the sacrifices stars made to become beloved by millions. And of course,
God, that's perfect. We can go now. That's perfect. That is perfect. See, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's a perfect summation of what Norma Jean was after, right? So, she goes to this place called Hollywood, and this is, basically a fantastical metaphor of Hollywood, of course. As I wrote here, a narrative space for the legend to be created and unfold. And so this is June 1949 as we get started in this, as she arrives. And I found out, George, on Wikipedia, 1949 is the start of what they call her breakout years in Hollywood. So I appreciated, that there's a lot of touch points in reality that come into this fantastical world to start off with, so you open up the book and we get the what's her name, Betty Boop, and much like in the Twilight Man, sometimes we get this imagery of television. So the panels are shaped like old television screens. Sometimes we get imagery of a movie, or like the cover shows, a stage, that kind of stuff. So I appreciate that. But then when we actually get introduced to Norma Jean, this is on page 8 of my digital copy here, George. The art, the colors, I don't know how you felt about this, but it really reminded me a lot of Ben Templesmith's art, if you're familiar with his work. He is the creator of Wormwood. He did 30 Days of Night. And with Warren Ellis, he did the comic book, one of my favorite comic books of all time, called Fell. And so
I agree with you. I'm looking at it now.
There are a lot of similarities there in this style, because there is a few different styles that Rodolphe employs throughout this work. And I love the way he plays with color. I mentioned before on the cover, Marilyn is like bathed in a spotlight. Here on page 11, where she goes to this agency to get some photos of herself taken because she wants to be a movie star. She wants to be an actress. On that page, so they're taking a photo, the flash bulb goes off, and her face is so brightly lit in here that it basically erases her features. She becomes less of Norma Jean and something else, right? And then later, of course, when she does transform into Marilyn, after she's chosen by the Holy Woods founders, and I'll talk about them a little bit.
Oh yeah.
And she actually gets some plastic surgery done, and she then is transformed into Marilyn Monroe. And a lot of the time when Marilyn is shown throughout the rest of the book, when she shows up, or when she appears on the pages, she's again in that kind of white. She's depicted as a white character, almost literally white. And I thought that was a very interesting choice on the part of the artist. Again, stars, they're stars. She's a literal star in this case, right?
And like you said, drawn differently. The art style for her has changed.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Her depiction of Norma Jean as Norma Jean is completely different in the way that she is depicted here as Marilyn Monroe. So definitely exaggerating the two personas, differentiating the two personas. So I thought that was really a really cool choice.
And the artwork for those surrounding her hasn't changed. She's changed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
But she hasn't changed.
That's a great point. Yeah. Yeah.
But before we get too deep, at the beginning in the Betty Boop sequence, the second screen, instead of it just being Betty Boop or the title card for the cartoon, there's text, and the text is supposedly almost be part of the title card to introduce the cartoon, but it's more really introducing you to the story of Norma Jean. Listen, my children, and you shall hear an exciting story of a little deer who's been read rumors of Red Riding Hood. Some are bad and some are good. Why do they pick on the poor little kid? Some say she didn't, and some say she did. You've surely heard this story before, how she tried to keep the wolf from the door. How really true can a story be? Well, watch, my dears, and you will hear and see.
Mm.
So that using the Betty Boop cartoon in reference to Marilyn's life, especially Betty Boop as a Red Riding Hood, having to deal with the wolf or the wolves in her life, I thought that was a nice choice to use to open the book.
Yeah. I kind of missed that part, George. That is, I mean, I picked up on the imagery of, the wolf and Betty and what happens later in the book. But yeah, I totally kind of skipped over that intro text that you just read. So that's really cool.
I mean, there's no way that's part of the original cartoon. I don't think there's no way. But who knows? I don't know.
So okay, so where do you want to go next with this, George? Because there's just so much. Like I said,
I'm going to let you take the lead.
This is 230 pages.
Yeah, you have way more notes on this than I do.
Oh yeah, I know that's the problem. I have too many notes. Yeah. But okay, so I mentioned the founders before, and so I did a little research on these guys. Mm-hmm. So the founders in this book, they're shown as these. Much like I just realized this in the Twilight Man book, where I described the passengers on the plane with the round white eyes, the founders are depicted the same way, pretty much. Their faces are dark. They're always shown as kind of in shadow, but their eyes are just completely white and kind of like they're lit from mm-hmm. within. So they're kind of mythical creatures in a sense, right? So what I found though, so they talk about how the founders came to Hollywood and they established this place, and this is where movies come from. And they even talk how the movies are made and then shipped through tubes from Hollywood to places around the world. And they even show the tubes in a few spots in this book. So right there, I mean, that's just the fantastical metaphor for Hollywood and the delivery system, right?
And at some point, okay, first of all, the founders are depicted as like decaying corpses.
They are very old. I think they say they're 100 and something. Yeah, they're like
190 or something like
mm-hmm.
that, right?
They are based on actual people. Mm-hmm. Harvey and Data?
Yeah, I think so.
Daida, maybe? Harvey Henderson Wilcox, who was born in 1832 and died in 1891. So, and Daida was his wife. They owned a ranch west of the city of Los Angeles, which the wife named Hollywood. And so that's where we get Hollywood. That's where that's I don't know where she came up with that, but that's what it is. And so they become these kingmakers, if you will, in Hollywood in this story. So they're still very much alive and have a lot of control over what's going on in their Hollywood. So there's another interesting character in here that's also actually, I was trying to see if he is based on an actual person. I don't think I found that. Anyway, Jasper, who is referred to as the Phantomatic, he is the person in the story. This is on starting on page 40. He takes photos of Norma Jean because those initial photos that I mentioned earlier, where her face is washed out in the light, those get seen by the Harvey. Did I say Harvey? Is that the founder?
Well, Wilcox, the male Wilcox.
Wilcox. So he actually saw those pictures and cut out the lips, Norma Jean's lips from the photo, and then that prompts Phantomatic to take pictures of Norma Jean. And so it's explained to Norma Jean later that the reason that Jasper has that name, Phantomatic, is that his shots expose the subject's star quality. And there's a scene in which Jasper is looking at the photos of Norma Jean, and he, much like, it reminded me of the scene from Pulp Fiction, where they open up the case, the MacGuffin of the movie, and they open up the case, and it's like they see this thing and they're like awed by what is in there. And of course, we as the audience have no idea what that thing is. And so it reminded me of that, because what we see is Jasper looking at the photos in a completely darked out room. Or no, he closes the blinds, he cuts off light coming in from the room, but then he lights everything with it using his own lights, so as to chase away the shadows within that room. And there's a reason for that. maybe I'll get to that in a second, but then he looks at the photos that he took and he sees something. We don't know what he sees.
Well, he's in the dark room because that's how you develop your photos. And he sees whatever he sees while he's in the dark room.
Oh, okay.
He shines the lights because he doesn't want the shadows to see what he does.
Right. Yes, exactly. Because I guess we might as well just talk about the shadows. The shadows we see a few times throughout the story, and they are so it could be just the menacing shadows. Kind of like a noir story, right? They're wearing their brimmed hats. That perhaps they have trench coats. It's hard to tell, but
it appears
because you don't actually see the people. All you see is their shadows in the scenes, but even more than that, the shadows seem to have substance because they appear to grab things or even murder people. But he sees something in the photos, in Norma Jean's photos, and he takes it upon himself to hide the photos, hide them from the founders, and then lies to them about that. Basically, he says that there's nothing there. And of course there is. Unfortunately, the founders, I think, pretty quickly find out that Jasper has tried to keep this from them. And then that's when basically they start the transformation. Once Norma Jean succumbs to the allure of Hollywood or Holywood and her desire to escape her past and become Marilyn.
And there's a countdown as this part, which is called, part one is called Blurred. There's a countdown to MM, it says, as some of the captions, as we get closer and closer to the point where Norma Jean has her metamorphosis into Marilyn Monroe. Now, I may be skipping ahead here, but when the founders want to meet with Norma Jean, based on the lips that were, the cutout of her lips that were thrown in the envelope that they eventually saw, the person who is her landlord, a nice guy who used to be, I guess maybe the Wilcoxes had a vaudeville show. So they had what were considered as freaks in the show.
Yeah.
And her landlord is a person who has 3 legs. And he was a 3-legged tap dancer back in the vaudevillian days, before vaudeville was put aside for movies. When he hears from Marilyn that the founders want to meet her, he has this look on his face. Well, actually, he becomes stone-faced. The look on his face is the same one. It doesn't change. But then he tells his son, quick, get a camera.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was ever really addressed again, but I saw it as more of, this guy knew what was going to happen to her because the founders, she had gained the founders' attention. He knew what was going to happen, and he wanted to capture her as Norma Jean on film because he knew she was not going to be that way anymore.
Yeah, that's how I took that too.
But was that ever revisited? I don't think that was ever really. In fact, I don't even think we saw him or his son.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And I thought that there was going to be something more with his son, because the son seemed to be challenged in some way.
Yeah, I expected more from that. It almost seems like maybe the Rodolphe decided to cut out some stuff for page count reasons. I don't know, but yeah, you're right. I fully expected more from both of those characters at some point, and we never did get that.
Yeah, it seemed like an unfulfilled plot point. But I guess once she becomes Marilyn, she doesn't need the trailer park in which she lives anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, she's totally turned her back on that part of her life, right. and which is a recurring theme throughout this, because she's running away to Hollywood. We find out much later to escape the pain of her past, and now once she transforms into Marilyn, she's put that part of her existence away. It's no longer relevant because she is now somebody else.
In fact, when she meets the founders, don't they? It's almost like they're the ones who are performing preparing her for plastic surgery.
Not only that, but it's very much like almost like a seance situation.
Yeah.
Because so Harvey Wilcox is drawing on Norma Jean's face with a marker to signify where she needs the plastic surgery done. And then Daida she's mumbling to herself. Her head is kind of cocked back, and her eyes are closed because they're dark. Because every other time we see them with their eyes open, they're like I said, they're white balls in their head. So she's I thought of it as she's scrying, because she's got a pencil in her hand that she's gripping, and she's drawing as she's doing this incantation, almost like an incantation, right? And as Harvey's drawing on her, she's drawing on paper, and then what we see is that she has Daida has written out Marilyn among these scribbles, and so they have incantated, if that's even a word, Marilyn from nothing, and now going to transform her Norma Jean into whatever Marilyn is.
And this whole first chapter, the artwork, and I think this is what maybe turned me off a little bit upon first reading, but the grotesque nature of the artwork, especially when you compare it to the artwork in the Hay Lamar book, the Rod Serling book, what I'm accustomed to in most comics, it kind of turned me off and took me out of it a little bit. But in the second reading, especially knowing how the book goes, I appreciated it more this time around, and realizing why it was like I was getting more out of it this time around, and I appreciated it more. But this first chapter, again called Blurred, does show that seedy underbelly, and really emphasize that seedy underbelly of true Hollywood, the real life Hollywood. And it's I'm not surprised that this was your favorite even at the beginning before you reread it again and again.
So part 2, let's move on to that. It's called Rebirth, which interestingly enough, let's see here.
Not DC Rebirth. We want to get that straight with your listeners.
It's the only chapter title that is phonetically, sort of phonetically written out. So you have R, and then in parentheses a backwards E, and then birth, but it is capital B, small I, capital RT, small h. So it's written sort of like you would see this word in a dictionary. But what it does,
schwa, right? The backwards E is the schwa.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, George. Wow.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that term in a very long time. But what it does is emphasizes the rebirth.
Yes.
Aspect, of course. I mean, I think that's kind of obvious with her transformation to Marilyn. And then what we get next is a theater marquee. Come see Marilyn Monroe, the sex goddess. You won't believe your eyes. And I love this scene. So there's this guy introducing her, and he's, Marilyn Monroe, and the music swells, and she walks out on stage, and it's packed with all these people, and it's that whitewashed image of Marilyn Monroe. We see the back of her, and then we see a close up of her lips, which is a recurring image throughout this book, and that's it in terms of her debut. And then we get her being Marilyn, performing in movies, acting, hooking up with a lot of different people, a lot of different guys.
Being taken advantage of, even prior to this point. I mean, sure, she fell in love with some people along the way, Joe DiMaggio being one
exactly,
of them.
Joe DiMaggio, yeah, which turned out not to be such a great guy.
but definitely there were a lot of people who took advantage of her. And in the scene you're describing, the audience members, when they show details of the audience members, they are drawn in that grotesque manner that we saw in chapter 1.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you described her, she's that bright angel in this world of seediness and ugliness. when they introduced her, and again, this goes to show the stereotypical sexism that even exists to this day. She was the laughing stock of the town. Now she is beauty incarnate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you know what? We made her that way. So basically the monsters Frankenstein her, if I can make that a verb, if I can take liberties.
That's
essentially
a good
making
analogy.
Her a monster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, the monsters take on various forms. It's, you know, you mentioned the grotesque quality of the art, the depiction of the characters on the page. That's one aspect of monsters. Another is what you just said. There's another monster or monsters.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really just one monster, but we'll get to that down the road. But yeah, that I love that. That's one of those things that I love about this book is there's a lot of recurring themes and motifs.
In this second part, am I skipping ahead if I ask you what you thought about the late night talk show scene? Actually,
that's where I wanted to go next.
Perfect. Let's do it
with this because So this is after she's hooked up with Joe DiMaggio. She has this beautiful house now. The dialogue here says, "I was told that you're fond of white," which is, you know, again, another reason why we see her that way, I guess. And so it's called the White Suite. And so it's this spacious, beautiful, well-lit house that she now inhabits. And she has this, what do they call it? A color hotel, which is this.
Yeah, I love that thing.
This square or this box with these bulbs, these colored bulbs on it. And all she has to do is press one and it calls a particular person. So it's programmable, which is, I looked this up, color hotel, tried to see, was it a thing? And,
doesn't it look like it could have been for back then?
Yeah,
though?
exactly.
Yeah.
I could not find a reference to something that looks like this or performed in the function that this performs.
It looks like the type of thing you would have seen in the Twilight Zone. Like so somebody would fantastically have come up with it in that time period, but the technology could not possibly have existed for it to work.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, things are looking up for Marilyn Monroe. And then I presume an assistant says they're waiting to prep you to Marilyn. They're waiting to prep you for the late night show. And so then we get that scene that you're talking about. And we get this depiction of the host as this, I don't know, how would you describe like a smiley faced head?
Yeah. I mean, it's so generic. That it's like a happy face.
Yeah, it could be any night show host, right? I mean, I think that's what they're going for with this.
Yeah.
So this host is interviewing Marilyn, and so he says, "Before we start, I'd like to ask you a question. How's Norma doing? Know the girl, tall, plain, brunette?" And Marilyn says, "No," and which causes the audience to laugh riotously.
Uh-huh.
Ain't she something? The host says, "What a sense of humor, those snappy comebacks." And then he launches into this joke, I guess. But what we see is Marilyn now not smiling as she was and kind of looking down. And she looks distressed, right? And this goes on for several panels on this page. And at one point, there's this internal, I want to say, dialogue. Dialogue box, not box. What do they call those things? But word balloon. You know, I just started reading comics yesterday, George. These terms are new to me. Anyway, so it starts off. So in one panel, Nor, and then boom, one panel that's empty, another panel, Ma, Nor, Ma, and then then we starts the real world, quote unquote real world, starts to intercede because we hear, as Marilyn is hearing, the audience laughing, and then the host says, "But let's get back to you, shall we?" And then in the next panel that ends that page, suddenly she snaps back into character. She's smiling again. Her eyes are focused. So what about that scene did you want to talk about?
This is where I thought I could maybe rely upon your background in literature because I know that there's something there that I missed.
Well, so to me, this is the start of the breakdown. So she's achieved what she wanted. And so she's had she's had these flings with people. She's gotten together with Joe DiMaggio. She has the beautiful house. She has the career, but there's something still missing. And this whole question of Norma, how's Norma doing? Well,
Right,
Norma's
exactly.
not doing so well, is she? Because as soon as the focus is not on Marilyn in this scene, because like I said, the host is telling a joke,
Right.
and she's suddenly consumed by the idea of her former self, and she's having a rough time with it, because then the very next scene is her going to Dr. Goodson. Is that his name?
Yeah, in fact, let's go back to that really quick. Prior to the talk show scene and her getting that house that you said was all white. And when you think about it, all that white, all that light keeps the shadows out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while those shadow people that are affiliated with the founders aren't really threatening her in any way, you could almost look at that as her own, whatever shadows, whatever demons she's trying
Exactly.
to keep at bay. And that's why I heard you like white, and everything has got to be in light, because when she is done with the talk show, it's evening, the house is dark, and she's sitting there and she's looking at that color hotel.
Yeah, color hotel, and
green.
it's green for green sun. That's the doctor.
Yes. And while they didn't give her the name, they did say that would be the therapist.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's how she goes over there. So now the shadows are overtaking. And that's just me piggybacking on your stuff. Believe me, I'm not trying to be any intelligent, trying to read anything intelligent on this. But that's how I kind of saw it, because of those shadowy figures that had existed before.
Well, and I don't know if you noticed this, George, but we do see now a coloring difference on Marilyn. She is still bathed in light, but there's more nuance, there's more shade to it. So, there's that transformation, that subtle transformation through the coloring. But she goes to Greenson, and, to her credit, is trying to fix this in some way, right? So he asks her, "What brings you to me?" "I'm not too sure," she says. "I'm feeling funny. It's like I'm lost somehow." So, at least she recognizes that about herself and is, like I said, trying to seek help. But and she continues here, I'm feeling confused and disoriented, like the whole world knows all about a woman I can barely even recognize. Do you understand? Maybe it's another side to fame. And he's like, he's the Hollywood psychiatrist. So, there's an agenda here. He was assigned to her in a sense. So he prescribes her some tablets to calm her down, which, eventually ends up not being very helpful to her. But she notices these scribblings on the wall, and seems to be very taken with those, or at least startled by them. I'm not quite sure how to take that expression on her face. And that becomes important here later, because, and if I skip anything that you want to cover, George, let me know. But she's trying to do a scene in a movie, and her stutter is back. We didn't talk about her stutter. As Norma Jean, she would stutter all the time. Not all the time. There's a few times early on in the book where, when talking about being what she might become, she would not stutter. Or when she read her lines for the commercials that she did not stutter, because that was the proto Marilyn.
And in fact, I think even when she was first getting her photos taken, no, I think, somebody said to her in the casting section, "Oh, an actress with a stutter," and they start laughing. Somebody back when she was in her early Norma Jean days.
Yeah. So here we are. She's doing this scene as Marilyn, and the stutter is back. So, the breakdown is happening pretty quickly, and we don't know quite why. And the next scene that she's talking to, I presume, this is maybe the director or the producer.
being belittled in
Yeah.
every way.
Yeah. You've done commercials. Those were just fine. What the hell's going on here? And she said, those were commercials. And he says, oh yeah, what's the difference? This is a movie. Who do you think you are? He says to her. You think it's Shakespeare we're doing here? Going back to your point about about dumbing it down for the masses, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Well, and his quote of, between you and me, I'd much rather make 3 million people laugh than get 15 of them thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know you agree with.
Yeah. Another connection to maybe the Rod Serling story too.
Right.
We give them we give them just that, a fun and sexy time. So
right.
he said before that. So,
and she even says here that because it's not a commercial, that it's a movie, that she'd like to get to know her character better.
Mm-hmm.
She even says something like that, and that's where he goes into this whole tirade about stop thinking, just do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't need to know your character. Just say your lines. Who cares? The audience doesn't care. They want to see you.
Yeah,
in fact, the scene that we're talking about, she was naked. I don't know if they showed her naked on screen, but apparently it was a shower scene.
Yeah. I wonder if there's some sort of connection between her wanting to know the character more and, you know, the connection between her and her previous self.
Could be.
You know,
right.
Norma Jean was who she was. Marilyn Monroe, is that the character? Or is the transformation such that now Norma Jean is the character? Does she want to get to know Norma Jean? Or, you know, so I think there's some levels here that even I'm not sure how I should interpret this yet. But that's one of the things I love about this book.
And before we get to the next scene, after her encounter with her producer, prior to the talk show scene, the shadowy figures did visit the photographer. Yes. Do we want to talk about that, or do we want to leave that ambiguous?
Well, that's who I alluded to earlier when I said that the shadow figures murder, because they kill him for holding Marilyn, holding out on the founders about Marilyn, about the photos. So, and then we've talked a lot about how Marilyn is portrayed, the grotesque quality of some of the other characters in the book. And then there's that scene after the movie scene that we just talked about, where she's having an argument with Joe DiMaggio, and he has seen. So they show the famous picture of her where her skirt blows up and shows her underwear and her bare legs. And that's a pretty famous image of Marilyn Monroe, right? And he says, "This is your work. This is the entire scope of your talent. You disgust me." And she starts to protest, but Joe, it's only for the part, and he screams at her, "Don't touch me." And notice in that next panel, George, she is becoming almost immaterial. She's becoming lines on a page, not a fully realized character as we've been seeing her so far depicted in the story. And
meanwhile, Joe is becoming more and more grotesque.
Yes. Yeah. To the point.
Fact,
okay.
Any Yankee fan out there would have a very big problem with how he's portrayed.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. On the next page, that transformation of her becoming less than what she is because of the way that she's being treated by Joe is depicted by, she basically disappears into very few lines. It's barely the outline of a head with eyes, a nose, and a face on the page. And then, as you pointed out, Joe is becoming more grotesque. He becomes monstrous to her, to us, in one particular panel, and he's colored in reds, and it's just scribbles. His teeth are like a monster, like huge and monstrous, right? Yelling at her, "Don't you touch me." And then he leaves. But I really wanted to point out, this is where the artist Rodolphe is now going into using art to depict the, more emotional states or to suggest something very, very important to the character of Marilyn Monroe.
The narrative becomes a little more sophisticated. Not that it wasn't sophisticated before, but now this is where you have to start thinking a little.
Agreed. Yeah.
And I think this is what I missed upon first reading, or I missed some of it upon first reading.
There's a later scene here where she's invited to, what is this called? This thing.
Do they even say what it is?
I thought they did. Anyway, she's invited to address the people.
Oh, the HFA. But what is the HFA? Hollywood. The Hollywood Founders Association? I don't know. But the guy called it the HFA.
You're
driver.
right. Yeah. He calls it, the driver calls it the most exclusive, influential, one of the most exclusive, influential clubs on earth. Right. And she's actually looking forward to this. And this is, oh boy, talk about grotesquerie here. Male grotesquerie.
And we met Otto Preminger earlier in the story, and I'm wondering if he's the one, and just because he's bald, I don't know, maybe that's why we were introduced to him earlier in the story. So I don't know if this is supposed to be a depiction of something that really happened, and they're trying to show us that this is him, plus maybe we're supposed to recognize some of the other people in this picture, which I don't necessarily recognize, but maybe they're supposed to be actors, maybe famous actors at the time. I'm not sure.
So she calls him the honorary. Oh no, maybe she's talking to the other guy in the scene. Anyway, honorary chairman. So the bald guy that you're referring to is referred to as Bill in a later page.
Oh, do they call him Bill? Oh, okay. All right.
Regardless, basically, she came there to address the HFA, and then Bill announces that, did you know that despite her angelic looks, this lady has just offered to entertain you tonight? Of course, she had not. He says, settle down now, fellas. She's got plenty to go around. You weren't planning on, and to her, he says, you weren't planning on standing around twiddling your thumbs, were you? Everybody works here. Everybody. And, the crowd is hooting and hollering. Some of the words we see here on the page or on this panel is, we see your ass, need help. Come on, show it, things like that. Bill says, you flaunt yourself to the public every day, but you're a goody-goody to those who made you. That's not very polite.
And just like before, the rendering of Marilyn is getting more simplistic.
Exactly.
She's just lines on a page, and her eyes are like wide with fear and surprise as the grotesque men around her are retaining their features, the detail of their features.
Bill slips one part of her dress off her arm, a little helping hand, he says there. But then someone notices she's gone and pissed herself. And she's just standing stock still. She's frozen in this moment. And another guy comes up, and that's where we get to the name. Be nice to her, Bill. And he says, it was a bad joke. Somebody says it was a bad joke. Tell her, Bill, she needs to hear it. And Bill's smiling through gritted teeth, it looks like, says, why, of course, we were joking. Just joking. Anyway, so this guy, the guy that interceded on her behalf, takes her home and then invites her to his daughter's 10th birthday. And then she goes inside her now not well-lit house in the dark. Again, we get another scene like that, like you described earlier. But then the next page is a completely white page with her drawn in wholly in pencil. So there's no inking, there's no color here, and it's just her in the fetal position on the floor, which the power of a drawing in a comic book like this, so simple.
Yep.
Depicting hardly anything. I mean, this is wasted space on a comic book page normally, right? we would probably be complaining about this if it were in a Superman comic or a an Iron Man comic or something.
Right, we'd be yelling at John Byrne for the Alpha Flight issue with a Snowbird,
Snowbird,
and yeah, right,
which I thought was pretty cool back then. But anyway, this
I did
is
too.
this is so profound, so powerful. This
Right.
page here.
So little says so much.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Anyway, she does. I'm going to speed through some of this. She does end up going to this birthday party, or no, she's going to the birthday party, but then ends up meeting this red-haired girl, whom we find out whose name is Sugar. Oh no, she does go to the birthday party. Yeah, that's right. Meets the girl.
Well, what happens is she's on the way to the birthday party. There was an accident with a horse,
Mm-hmm.
and she figures that she'll miss the birthday party. But when the driver tells her where she is in relation to where she's going, she realizes she could walk through the woods to get to the house to attend the birthday party and not miss it.
Right.
And then she runs into Sugar.
Yes.
Mhm.
And she encounters, like I said, I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff here, George, but she encounters Sugar later in the woods, and they become playmates, essentially.
Mhm.
On page 161, this is where we get, I mentioned those childlike drawings in the psychiatrist's office. This is where subtext becomes text, because what we see over the next few pages is as if a young girl drew what she and her friend did that day.
Mm.
So very crude pencil drawings of Sugar and Marilyn laughing, playing in the woods. They're playing what's
Hide and seek.
hide and seek. Thank you. All I could think of was "Ready or Not, Here I Come." And so I presume it's Marilyn who is counting down, and Sugar is hiding, and we get to the point where we see a drawing of Sugar kneeling on the ground. Her back is to us, and we see a little bit of foliage, but again, most of the page is white. Mm-hmm. And so I think that comes into play later. And that takes us into chapter 3, which is entitled Hide and Seek, which nicely done after that first, or that previous scene.
I do want to point out that those tubes that you were talking about, where movies apparently get fed throughout the country out of Hollywood.
Yeah.
They play a role in this too.
That's true.
I mean, at least they're shown.
Well, right. Because Sugar's enamored with that idea. She thinks it's really cool. But I think, if I remember correctly, Marilyn kind of keeps her distance. She's distancing herself from that, or she's not very comfortable around those tubes.
Yeah, the first time she listens, I mean, Sugar's really she's
you're
on
right.
top of.
Yep.
She's on top. Marilyn listens, and that's where the drawing style changes a little bit again for her. But the film is Gone with the Wind, apparently, that they're listening to. But later, or like right before, I think it's right before the drawings you were talking about, they're playing together and they're on top of the pipes. And the look on their faces as they're listening to what's coming through the pipes is almost like, wait, what are we listening? I'm not going to say horror, but it's like shock. And then the drawings of the hide and seek game begin. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means they're supposedly maybe listening to a Marilyn Monroe movie. I don't know what that necessarily means. But there's definitely something happening. They're listening to something coming through the pipe. They have that look of shock on their faces, and then the drawings of the hide and seek game start. Right.
Yeah. So exactly. We don't know what they're listening to, what they're exposed to, but all of a sudden it dramatically shifts in tone.
Yeah.
At least in terms of the style of drawing. So yeah, good point. You're right. I misread that scene in terms of Marilyn's reaction to the tubes.
And then the beginning of the hide and seek chapter, we have more of the child drawings.
Mm-hmm. And then we also get, so Marilyn is telling Sugar a story, and it's about the wolf, the big bad wolf. So we get that again. from the beginning of the book.
It's basically it's kind of the Three Little Pigs, but with goats, and the wolf is trying to trick the goats into opening the door by making them think that the wolf is their mother.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially the story.
And then it's at one point while Marilyn's telling this story, and again, the detail of this, how Marilyn is portrayed in this she almost is not there.
Right.
In a sense, right? But it's Sugar, again, we see the back of her, and she says, "I don't like the wood. It's always full of monsters." And so I think maybe this is even the first time we've actually seen the word monsters used in this way.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this chapter 3 is a long sequence of just these child drawings, done in the style of childlike drawings.
And then when you finally get a page, the first page of actual, that takes you out of the child's drawings and into what we'll call the real world. It appears she's in a car, or I guess we're to believe she's leaving Sugar, or we really don't know where she's going. And some of the vaudevillian freaks from the early days, pre-Hollywood, are in the woods, in a clearing in the woods.
Right, because it's the 50th birthday of Hollywood, so the 50th anniversary celebration.
Right.
Oh yes, and this is right. This the host of this celebration is tonight. I too would like to mark the anniversary by introducing a woman whose human qualities have often been maligned, her talent woefully underused.
Mm-hmm.
Her name is as noble as the role I've just given her. Please welcome Elizabeth Taylor. So just like with Hedy Lamarr, who was replaced by Marilyn Monroe, as we noted, Elizabeth Taylor is the new flavor of the season.
Right, and the last panel on that page, after Elizabeth Taylor is introduced and everybody stands up to give her a standing ovation, Marilyn is smaller than a child on her chair.
Yes, good point.
And still, and again, drawn in just simple lines, and she's obscured by all the people standing.
But then this scene transitions into her. Everyone's starting to stare at her as she's drinking, and she looks at her hand and it's covered in blood. Mm-hmm. And then we see that her midsection is also covered in blood. And she wakes up from a dream. And Sugar is there with this face mask on, so we don't see her face. And just a bad dream. And Sugar tells Marilyn, "They're coming. I told you so." And Marilyn says, "Leave me alone for a while, please." And this is where things take, Marilyn's life takes a very, very bad turn. She's drinking more. She's taking pills, and things are not looking good. What did you think of? So we get this long. We basically get 3, almost 4 pages of just panels, these beige-looking panels with some dialogue on it. So we don't even see anybody. It's basically a phone conversation, and those beige panels turn into, again, white. The ending of that scene is just white. And she's talking about this, the 50th birthday gala with Bob. And she says, or Bob says, "Are you going to it? The Wilcoxes need to know." And she says, "You know what makes me really sad, Bob? That didn't even sound like an invitation." So she's, she is property of the Wilcoxes, of Hollywood.
And then she says she just wants to go home to the bus driver. They don't know where home is.
Yeah, I think you've had too much to drink. I'll have to ask you to step off the bus.
Right.
And then she just kind of walks. Yeah, she walks away. But then the next scene we get is this car dragging this floating balloon clown, announcing the 50th birthday party.
Oh, and before that, though, when the bus driver drops her off, the last panel of that rainy night is her walking head down past the Hollywood sign. She's walking by the H and the O of the Hollywood sign.
Yes.
And that's just a sad, just a sad image of her walking by that. And then we go to what you're describing, the big balloon on the back of the car.
Yep. And her being apparently in the Hollywood area, right? And so she runs across Sugar again, and they reunite. And then the next scene is blood is dripping from Sugar. And Marilyn says, "What's the matter, Sugar?" It's the monsters that and this is where Sugar starts stuttering. They found me. And now they're eating me up. And I'm not going to do the stuttering thing because that would not be good. They eat me. They eat my words so I won't talk about them. They don't like being talked about. And so I thought that was a great description of stuttering, some malevolent force eating someone's words so they can't get out what they are trying to say. I don't know if it's plain yet, but I think Sugar is definitely a metaphor for Norma Jean at this point. And because Sugar is saying, don't go, or no, somebody comes to the door. She's like, don't open it. Don't go. And she basically grabs onto Marilyn, and Marilyn's saying, stop it, Sugar. That hurts. And Sugar is like grasping at Marilyn's back and scratching her. And Marilyn starts to scream, help me, help me. And she gets the door open, and we see the surprised and aghast faces of these men. And Marilyn saying, help me. Then we get another scene of her with Greenson. Greenson.
Yeah.
And this is, again, the depiction of Marilyn. This is a little different. Before, this is on page 196. Before, Marilyn would just kind of disappear into the page. Here, she is like her image is being scribbled upon. She's being overwritten, perhaps. And Greenson confronts her with some pictures. And this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, George, because he says, perhaps you'd like to compare it with... Oh, wait, no, there's another photo. So the first photo he shows, and he says, do you recognize her? Clearly, they must have recognized her. As we know, children are obedient. They obey to be loved in return. And this is where we see her being her imagery, her eyes, her face, her body being overscribbled on the page, but we don't get to see the photo,
right?
Whatever this photo is, right? That triggers this reaction in her, but then we do get to see another photo of Marilyn's mother, Gladys, and her as a little girl, and boy, does that little girl look like somebody we've already been introduced to.
And we didn't talk about her mother prior to this.
Right, because at the very beginning, it wasn't Norma Jean talking to her mother or writing a letter, I forget now, to her mother.
Yeah, and this image of her mother was used in that. So we also know that this is her mother.
Right, that's right. That creepy image. So yeah, she's...
I thought you purposely left that out, so I skipped by it. But
no, I forgot all about it. That's very important. Yeah. Because I think we're getting this dialogue as if she's either writing a letter or talking to. Well,
it's
mother.
like she's talking to a roommate, because there is somebody sitting there at the foot of the bed,
right?
And then you realize, oh, this is all in her mind. She doesn't have a roommate.
Yeah, but the image of the roommate is this woman with long hair sitting in a chair that's inside her suitcase, and then the next panel we see her reaching into the suitcase, and that's where we find out she's talking to her mother, how she misses her mother. Yeah. See, there's just so much to this. Okay, so we're almost done, folks. She is getting ready for her appearance at the 50th gala, right? And so she's getting her makeup on. We see someone's applying a Band-Aid to her forehead as they're putting on her makeup and getting her ready. She puts on, adjusting her wig. I think it's the first time we've seen that shown as a wig as opposed to her own hair. And then we see her image in a shattered mirror, and that's how she needed the Band-Aid, because she's the one that banged her head up against the mirror. That's how I took it. We get that famous scene. It's referencing her song, her singing "Happy Birthday" to President Kennedy, but here in this scene, she's singing "Happy Birthday" to the Wilcoxes in Hollywood, and she exits the stage and collapses. And this is where the surreal aspect of this book really ramps up, because it's she is running through the woods, being chased. She comes up to this house, and it's Sugar's house, and they go hiding, or at least Marilyn is hiding in the closet. Sugar is still out there waiting, and in comes this guy, and he says, "You gonna be nice and put on your pajamas?" And he then lays her down and then takes her pajamas off. And what we see interspersed among this stuff is the imagery of Marilyn in, again, the very simple line drawing only version of her screaming no at the situation. And the dialogue here is telling Sugar, just look at the ceiling. And she sees the shadows of the leaves and branches from outside. And that's another thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of the book. When she first arrives, she in her new place, something very similar. And when I first read that, George, I was very confused as to why she appeared to be looking up at this a similar image or a similar situation, and then suddenly she got up and went to take a shower. Mm-hmm. You know, there's no internal dialogue. There's no indication what the heck's going on here. And of course, you know,
this explains it.
It's this, it's this scene, this memory.
She's had monsters in her life from the beginning, even before she entered the grotesque holy wood.
What did you, the later scene? So we see her cutting her hair.
Mm-hmm. Oh, but wait, before she cuts her hair, we get another all white page.
Yeah. Yep.
After Marilyn actually exits the closet after everything's over, and she's hugging Sugar, it's another image where, actually in this case, it's still like all pencil, but it's actually a little rougher than the other one that you described before. But down in the lower right of the panel, of the page, I mean, is where she's embracing Sugar.
Yeah, and a little bit of color in this one as well.
Right.
And in some parts of this, it's almost, you can almost like see through Sugar. So yes. I thought that was a really nice touch, given the situation that we are now realizing is going on here. But then, okay, so like I said, there's that scene where she's cutting her hair. Someone's banging on the door. Norma, open up. It's Daddy. And then she they keep saying, your mommy's here too. We just saw you on TV. We're so proud of you, Sugar. Mm-hmm. We're real sorry that we weren't there. Now open up now, Sugar. And she actually does open the door saying, Daddy, and then a scream into the night sky. What we see is this across the night sky with the trees and stuff. What did you make of that scene?
Well, I mean, the way I look at it is she's facing the demons, and the demons are winning. She's reliving everything again, and she's breaking down. Mm-hmm. That's how I look at it. Mm-hmm. What about you? Did you read anything deeper than that?
No, that's pretty much how I read it too. I just thought it was cute. The only thing that kind of still confuses me is the dad thing. So that led me to, because I don't think the dad is ever mentioned. We've seen the mom or her, seen her talking about her mom a few times, but not the dad. So I did look this up. Turns out that Marilyn Monroe, because her mom had a psychotic break and couldn't take care of her, so she ended up living with some people for a while, and one of those families, the guy did molest her. And so she had some other issues as well with some other families. Oh yeah, here it is. The actor George Atkinson, with whose family she stayed after her mother's breakdown, he's the one that sexually abused Marilyn when she was very young. And so, that all this, that explains, the previous scene that we talked about with the HFA folks and her pissing herself. She, a very similar situation, obviously. And so she froze there and her body reacted that way. Okay. So I think, where are we at here? Yeah, here we go. The final pages of this. And I wanted to read these because I thought they were very pertinent.
Yeah.
The scene is her again with the late night show host, but she's laughing and she appears to be having a good time. And and the words say, in time she started to laugh again, to have fun, and every once in a while to speak louder than usual, as if to cover up the tiny voice that was murmuring inside of her. The voice whispering on the next page that the worst thing about playing hide and seek is knowing there's no one coming to find you. And we see that same image that I described earlier when her and Sugar were playing hide and seek, and we just see that lone image of Sugar in the woods by herself.
It's a very affecting book.
Oh my God. I know. George and I talked about this before we started recording as to how we were, basically how I was going to approach this. Because I can't help myself but to talk about the really good parts. And of course the ending is one of the really good parts of this book. But that means now I've spoiled the ending for you. But to hear someone talk about it is so much different than actually experiencing it.
Oh yeah, we're not doing it justice.
No, God no.
And Humanoids is not a sponsor. They're not getting anything from us on this. But if anything, you should pick up these books, especially Marilyn's Monsters.
Yeah. I mean, this book is, I think I said this before. This book is so totally worth the moniker of graphic novel. More than I think maybe, well, I can think of a few other books, but they're written by, what's his name? Who did Watchmen?
Alan Moore.
Alan Moore, thank you. Like I said, I just started reading comics yesterday, George.
Listen, I may not be able to describe things the way I want to because I'm not as eloquent and I don't have my thesaurus or my dictionary near me. However, I do have these little tidbits of information in this mind.
You contain that trivia? Yeah. Anyway, like I said, graphic novel, it plays with time, memory, trauma. All while trying to get this is my notes on this, George, to cap it off. While trying to get into Marilyn Monroe's psyche, or I should say Norma Jean's psyche, and why she became who she became, the price she paid. Like I said, I've read this 3 times. I just basically scrolled through it again tonight, and I'm still picking up that. Like you mentioned, her strolling past the Hollywood sign. I didn't realize what that was, George, until you pointed it out. I thought it was just like some dimly lit. I thought it was her house, actually. Dimly lit part of her house for some reason. I don't know why. So yeah, there's just so much to it. There's so much depth and interesting storytelling going on in Marilyn's
Monsters. It's a totally different experience than the Hedy Lamarr book or the Rod Serling book.
Yeah, you cannot go wrong with either of or any of these 3 books.
But it is just because they're graphic novels that are biographies of celebrities. Comparing Marilyn's Monsters to the other 2 is almost like comparing apples and oranges.
Yeah,
just because they're both fruits, it's hard. you can't really compare the 2.
Yeah,
Marilyn's Monsters is another level of storytelling. Well, telling the story of a known figure. It's a different way to tell the story, different than the way the biography was approached for Rod Serling and Hedy Lamarr.
Yeah, I think Marilyn's Monsters is a much more poetic take, much more interesting take on the biography.
And once again, I'm really glad I read it again.
Yeah.
And I will read it a third time.
Yeah. Like I said,
and probably more times after this.
I'm going to go as soon as I can. I'm going to go buy the book to have it in my collection so I can actually have it
and
in
you
my
will
hands.
probably get a hard copy before I do. So I will be very curious to know if there is an essay in the back or a foreword
what else?
or
Yeah.
anything.
What's the back matter
right.
for this book? Exactly.
If any.
Yeah. And, and our little jaunt through this book does not do it justice. I had so many more notes that I took that I just because of time. And the flow of our conversation, I just didn't get into because there's just so much to it, so much to enjoy.
What I have realized out of the 3 books, this one, I have more questions than answers. And they're not the types of questions that I think you could just Google away.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's more in the approach. What was the author trying to say? What part of Marilyn's life were you trying to allude to here? There's so much depth in this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That it goes beyond just a normal biography.
Yeah. Oh wow! I'm so glad that I was watching that humanoids panel at San Diego Comic-Con at home last year.
Yeah, that's what started this whole thing.
It did, yes. I mean, they certainly, anytime you have a publisher's panel, they're there to promote their books, to gin up excitement about what they have to offer. And boy, howdy, did that work.
And nobody affiliated with San Diego Comic-Con or any Comic-Con is listening to this probably, but if you are, because more than likely they would listen to your show over my show. So I'm going to say it right here. I know the world is getting back to normal and people are talking about conventions, and actually conventions are being scheduled and talent is being booked at these conventions. I liked the online conventions that we had in 2020 in our pandemic year. And while a lot of things are sticking around, I think some good things are sticking around as a result of the pandemic. Things have changed. People have adopted new business models and things of that nature. And a lot of things will remain from the pandemic, things that we learned to adapt ourselves. I'm hoping conventions will include an online component to them as they go back to in person. Because I got to say, I got a heck of a lot more out of sitting at home watching Zoom panels just for San Diego alone than I would if I went to any convention in person. Because what was great about it was I could go beyond the weekend. And I didn't care that I wasn't the first one to hear whatever a special announcement about, say, Star Trek Discovery was, or, I didn't need to be in Hall H. And I didn't care that I was listening to the panel, watching the panel after it was reported on and everybody posted about it on social media. And I think there was more of an intimacy to the Zoom call as opposed to watching a filmed panel in Hall H or any other room at a convention, just because you got that close up and personal view of the panelists, whether they be celebrities, artists, writers, publishers, whatever. I liked that. And even if I have to pay $30 or $40, whatever the fee to get into a convention physically is, I wouldn't mind paying that or a portion of that or just paying the $30, $40, but having full access to all these panels rather than hearing about them from people. If you have a code and you can just watch it on YouTube or whatever, I would love that. And I hope that they do that and they don't totally abandon that. It may have been a pain in the butt for them, and it may have been a pain in the butt for the people who participated and they made no money from it. But boy, did I love it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they should incorporate.
And here's a
that.
perfect example of it, because neither one of us was going to San Diego.
Oh yeah.
And if we wouldn't have had the humanoids panel, you wouldn't have been aware, and you may not have had humanoids on your radar to even find the second bundle that you found.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is just almost like an advertisement for there is value to that online component of a convention, because now you open it up to people who are not traveling to your site. They're not going to your destination. Now you've broadened your audience for whatever message it is that you want. And yet,
Mm-hmm.
because they kind of do keep it tight for conventions. Sometimes I always thought that after a convention was over, that all the panels, you could find them somewhere. And I've never been able to do that. Maybe you can. Maybe you could before pandemic times, but I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, I don't think so. It depends on the particular.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching
convention.
those panels weeks after San Diego was done. And here's a perfect thing where, you and I got into the whole humanoids thing because of those panels.
Yeah, well, just like you were talking about with the panels and promoting things. I hope that we've done it, or we've done an adequate job of promoting at least these three works, if not others that Humanoids is putting out, because pretty much all of the life drawn stuff that I've read so far from this publisher has been fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And if this doesn't go to show, two out of the three that we talked about were translated from French. It just goes to show that there's a wealth of talent in the European nations that a lot of us here in America, in North America, are ignorant about, and we should open our eyes. I'm not. A lot of your listeners though probably aren't, but there are some people who are just superhero people.
Yeah.
And maybe they go to Image, maybe they go to Dark Horse here and there, but we got to open our eyes to what's going on elsewhere. The storytelling is a little bit different. It can be challenging at times, but it's well worth the journey.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And speaking of journey, George, I think we should end this one because
oh my God,
it is.
You think we were talking about previews?
Extremely late for you, I know, and so. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I know I talked your ear off. I apologize for not letting you get a word in hardly edgewise.
No, I was relying on you to do all the talking. Trust me.
But I'm glad that you were here with me, pointing out a bunch of things that I missed. So again, highlighting the fact that there are layers to these stories. It's good to reread stuff so you pick up on more things like that, and then just having a conversation with people to highlight those things that you might have missed.
Well, and I hope your listeners appreciated to hear the smart guy Eric and the dumb guy George.
No.
Two different perspectives of the same book.
I would agree with that part of the statement. Yes. The perspective part is great. So anyway, George, thank you so much for this.
Thank you for inviting me.
A long time coming. I know, and I'm so glad that we finally got to get together and not just chat about these comics, but it's always a pleasure to see and talk to you.
Thank you. Same here, man.
Do you want to remind the folks where they can find you on the interwebs?
Sure. When it comes to social media, I am at Meanwhile ATP on Twitter. That's me. And if you are on Instagram or Facebook, we are at Meanwhile ATP on Instagram. Rodney, one of my co-hosts, runs that. And we are at Meanwhile at the podcast on Facebook. Have to admit, as of this recording, I probably haven't been on Facebook more than 3 times this entire year. So if you want to,
it's not necessarily a bad thing.
I know, if you want to engage with us on social media, probably Instagram and Twitter are the best places. Meanwhile, ATP.
Yeah, and I if you've listened to the show for any length of time, you know that George has been on it. I've been on his podcast. And meanwhile, the podcast is a great conversation about popular culture and a bunch of other topics too, and sometimes including comics as well. So there's that bridge.
Somehow we fit that in there. That's right. Yeah, with my co-hosts Kristen and Rod.
Yeah. I love your guys' conversations, especially when you get into the more personal stuff between you three. So
the three of us, we look forward to the conversation every week.
Yeah, I bet.
And when we have to take a break from each other, when we get back together, if a week or two goes by and we have guest co-hosts or whatever, like when we get together, we're like, man, we missed you. We missed each other. Yeah. So we really enjoy those conversations.
Well, that sounds like the very definition of good friends to me. So,
yeah.
All righty. Well, I will let you go, George, so you can go actually get some rest before the day starts again. So I'll do that and remind everybody that if they would like to send feedback or just ask questions, or tell me, you talk too much about Marilyn's monsters, and I'll just simply say, sorry, I was excited and I love that book. But you could do so by emailing me at longboxreview@gmail.com.
If they have a problem, tell them to get their own podcast.
or they can also just chat at me at Longbox Review on Twitter. So there's that opportunity as well. So with that, I thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you all later. Bye-bye.